Hello and a very warm welcome. Thanks for tuning in to News 9 Live. Now, Xi Jinping's bonhomie with Vladimir Putin, his recent trip to the Kremlin and his unprecedented third term as the head of China has put the Western nations in a nervy condition. China-Russia's no-limit friendship has got the world worried over the implications on the Ukraine conflict and the Taiwan conundrum. But even as diplomatic ties between Russia and China put India in a predicament, we appreciate our trade ties with Russia but despise China. It gives China more breathing space on the Taiwan front, the South China Sea and its borders with India to plan its next step ahead. But with Putin getting support and continued stalemate on the war front, how will the West react? How does this impact India? Will this get to a point of joint military expansion? Does the unprecedented third term allow the totalitarian head of China to take on the Western hegemony on his own terms? Well, for an in-depth understanding, watch the docuseries Inside the Mind of Xi, only on our application News 9 Plus. We'll discuss those factors. First, here's a snippet of the episode.
The world should not be fooled by any tactical move by Russia, supported by China or any other country, to freeze the war on its own terms.
因为我们是互为最大的邻国，也是战略合作伙伴国。
Во всем мире это вызывает неподдельный интерес, и мы даже немножко вам завидуем.
Very disturbing meeting of minds of Putin and Xi, and clearly a sense that they have common adversary or a set of common adversaries.
China treats trade as an arm of politics, and it can easily decide to weaponize trade against you.
What does China expect? Weaken Russia, weaken the West, and let everybody come to me, and then I'll say, yes, I'm back to being the Middle Kingdom, the master of the universe.
Nearly 70 years ago, Mao Zedong said in Moscow that there are two winds in the world, the east wind and the west wind. And the east wind is prevailing over the west wind. Now, 70 years later, Xi Jinping, the man who is aiming to be the next Mao, is walking in the same steps, cozying up to Vladimir Putin to change the heavily skewed world order.
China is in bed with Russia. China spreads Russian lies every night on TV to their own domestic audience, and every Chinese diplomatic representation spreads the Russian lies, in particular in countries along the global south. So China is pretending to be neutral, but is not. China, it might make Russia more dependent on China. All benefits to a power with hegemonic ambitions.
Whether or not China's going to become, effectively an arms supplier to that conflict, which is now reported as a possibility, even through China's diplomatic and I don't like to use the word moral, but immoral support of Russia's behaviour.
So he wants to tell his domestic audience that, look, the whole world respects me, 8 billion people are begging me to be the president of the universe, but I've not accepted because I want to help you guys. This was aimed at his domestic audience. Certainly, internationally, optically, it gives him and the world the impression that Russia and China are very thick friends.
There's a ruthlessness about the Beijing regime that we have to be realistic about. There is something about
the communist regime in Beijing, which right now is quite menacing to the wider world.
Well, so News 9 Plus, that's the application. You can download it from the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store as well for other cutting-edge documentaries as well. But to understand what's really going inside the mind of Xi, we've got the man behind the story, Justin Thomas, news editor, News 9 Plus, joins us in the broadcast. And also joining us is Ambassador Deepak Vora, former diplomat. Justin, just to get the ball rolling here, we're way past beyond the ice-breaking situation. Why did you think it was right to name this episode Dictating Terms? Because, usually in all sorts of diplomatic meets, there are crisp suits and rigid handshakes. But I personally felt that between these two leaders, there was a lot of warmth. They were really comfortable in each other's presence. So why Dictating Terms as the name of the episode?
Dictating terms would be because primarily China, if you talk about them, when it comes to trade, they trade it as an arm of their politics. So which means that if they are against you, then they will weaponize that trade to take it on you. So countries are wary about it when they are dealing with China. They know that the country provides them a lot of cheap raw materials, cheap products that is required for them, also opens up a lot of market for them. But at the same time, they are wary that anytime any issues that comes up where you have to take sides here, whether with China. So if you don't take their sides, they're going to use that trade against you. So when Xi Jinping and Putin come together, so they have vested interest in terms of they are challenging the might of the West. So when they come together, they have an issue. They know that on one term they can weaponize the trade, and also military-wise they can weaponize. So this is a concoction between those two, which are ensuring that the situation is fluid. The West is nervy, and in terms they are at a driving seat, so to say, right now.
Well, absolutely. Ambassador Deepak Vora also with us on the broadcast. Ambassador, there were some snippets in the documentary. We could heard you, speak about the double standards of the Chinese as well. Now, Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister of Australia, he was also of the similar opinion. Words coming in from the British Member of Parliament as well, saying that China is in bed with Russia. Can you help the viewers understand from where are you coming from when you talk about Chinese double standards?
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure, sir, to be with you on your amazing channel, and you are an outstanding anchor. So is the news editor. He's brilliant. Let me put it across to you very simply so that people can understand. China's problem is its leaders' hubris and paranoia. Comrade Ping Pong, we have so many potatoes that piled one on top of the other, they would reach all the way to God, a farmer excitedly tells his leader. But Ping Pong says, God doesn't exist. Exactly, says the farmer, neither do the potatoes. This is the issue in China. So it's a fantasy land. No one knows what the reality is. One certainty is that Ping Pong is the lord of all he surveys within his country. Opposition has been obliterated, and his continuation as supreme leader ensured for the next 1,000 years. Now, people talk about his very warm relationship with Vladimir Putin. They've met dozens of times. They've even cooked together. They've gone riding together or swimming together or whatever. The reality is, and I say this very slowly, till not too long ago, perhaps a decade or a little more ago, the Russians thought that China was some kind of fifth world country not worth looking at. But then Russia went through its own difficulty. Putin had been looking, or Russia had been looking for at least 10 years to the West after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The West said, go fly a kite. They began to look to the East. China wanted Russia's technology, especially defense. Russia wanted China's money. So it was a perfect match. Nevertheless, about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a film. I speak Russian. This is a film you might want to see called Russia Betrayed. And the first episode of this internet documentary was an instant hit, showed how the Chinese are slowly gobbling up Siberia. So the Russians do not like or trust China. I've served as ambassador in 4 former Soviet Union space countries. They just don't like China. They much prefer India. So what's going on in his mind? He's just, one of his chaps has gone off to Honduras because Honduras has shifted recognition from Taiwan to mainland China. when you go around begging these tiny countries which are in deep trouble, economically, it's finished. I mean, Honduras, excuse me, widespread insecurity, poverty, high levels of violence, etc. When you go around to these fellows and seek to buy their loyalty, it means they don't like you for what you are. They like you for your money. And this joker in Beijing doesn't understand that this is not out of affection for China, but it's out of a desire to get its money. Now, you remember, sir, you know this better than I do, wanting to be the master of the universe, he launched his Global Peace Initiative and followed it up with a white paper full of platitudes, how China is such a wonderful peace-loving country. The whole world adores it. 8 billion people want ping pong to be the peacemaking, flame-dousing Globocop instead of those arsonist Americans, etc. An implicit recognition that the $1 trillion or so that he claimed to have spent on his much-touted Belt and Road initiative was a massive flop. And so we need a new concept to redeem China's badly dented image. Then came the March 2023 Saudi Arabia-Iran peace deal signed in Beijing, the first example of this new push for peace. Then he rushes off to Moscow thinking that he would resolve the dispute between Ukraine and Russia, issues his own 24-character manifesto on China's ambition, goes to Russia and says, when Putin says, well, get lost, I'm not going to agree to peace with Ukraine on terms other than my own. So ping pong says, oh, China believes in the United Nations. We are totally committed to whatever the United Nations say. You are? Happy birthday. 2016, a UN tribunal told China, get lost. This particular island, Scarborough Shoals or whatever, belongs to the Philippines. And you guys have come here to seek our arbitration. So China, get lost, it's the Philippines. And what does China say? Oh, United Nations, you get lost. This is mine and I'm going to keep it. So therefore, sir, the three takeaways from what I've been observing, I've served there. One, you cannot trust the Chinese at all. Second, they are delusional, the leadership. Excuse me, my throat is packing. There must be some Chinese virus. And the third thing is, they never acknowledge their mistakes. Remember the Great Leap Forward. You remember all the
right. But at the same time, Ambassador Vora. I mean that was really eloquently put as well. But I'm just trying to understand, because both these leaders, somebody like Vladimir Putin, I don't take him to be somebody who's naive to this marriage of pretense between the two countries. On the Libra scales, if both these leaders know exactly what's happening on. And what's going on the Libra scales, who has a higher hand, who has the upper hand, who, whose love for their country outweighs the others?
Oh, China, Russia, and there is no question about it, sir. Sooner or later, the West will realize Russia had wanted to join NATO, Russia had wanted to join the European Union. You know this better than I do. Boris Yeltsin, whatever the fellow's name was, used to fall on his knees before the Americans and say, please, please, please do this, etc., etc. Given half a chance, and I repeat this, given half a chance, every Russian minus 10 would emigrate to the United States. They love the US. How many would want to go to China? And this is true not just of Russia, but of the whole world. So the Russians are tolerating the Chinese. It's a marriage of inconvenience. And this marriage is going to split apart. As soon as the Ukraine issue is resolved, the West tells Putin, buddy, you are our brother, we love you, etc. He will dump China like a hot potato. You can see it happening, sir, in 2024.
Absolutely. Justin, would you like to echo on what the ambassador here is talking about? And also, how the trade deals play a significant role here, because, we really appreciate our trade deals with Russia, but China is a great, exporter of their goods and services as well. How does this impact India on the trade front?
On the trade front, I believe there's not going to be an impact, because both countries know, yes, politically, there's a lot of tensions or here and there flare-ups happening, but trade-wise, both countries know that both are important for each other. So there's no question of the political ties trying to overcome the trade ties as of now. But India is also very clear about the fact that the ties with Russia is equally strong, and they have diversified. So it's not just oil and gas, it's not just defense. Now there's pharma, there's IT. So these sectors are also coming to fore primarily because India understands that with the Western market shut for Russia, Russia requires an outlet for to thrive. So that is India. That's a natural ally for them. China, not so much for them, because again, the issue of trust factors and all that, how it's going to build up. But definitely for India, as you see, India is in a situation where they have to maintain a good trade ties with Russia, but also at the same time ensure that their traditional ties with Russia is safe. So that is a balancing act that they're doing fine as of now. And I don't think there will be too much of challenge, because Russia also knows that having India on their side is equally important. Because understand, the BRICS, which Russia, India, China are part of, is significantly the trade GDP global output is about 33%, which is more than the G7 countries putting up right now, which is 30%. So these countries know that they have to stay together if they have to build up their GDP growth also. So taking on the West, Russia and China will be taking up. But as far as trade ties are concerned, India is definitely going to ensure that the rise of the global GDP vis-a-vis the South, global South, keeps on increasing vis-a-vis the West.
Right, and it's interesting, Justin, that you spoke about the BRICS as well, because I'm going to take this question to Ambassador Deepak Vora as well. Ambassador, how do you think India is going to balance between the BRICS and the Quad? And on the other hand, you know, Russian trade deals with India, but China's contentious borders with India, you know, a war-like situation. Who do you think that Russia is going to stand with? So two balancing acts. Where does Russia stand, and where does India stand when it comes to the Quad and the BRICS?
The Quad is making China quadriplegic. We all know that. And it was initially meant to be, you know, it was a tsunami that engineered, so to speak, the Quad, and later it shifted to other areas. It has not yet acquired a very hard exterior, military exterior. There's a soft exoskeleton inside. So at the moment, they are focusing on things like supply chain resilience, on economic recovery through free and open seas. They're talking about IT, they're talking about vaccines. There's a number of things that they're focusing on, but not on any kind of military confrontation with China, which is very, very sensible. Otherwise, China will turn around and say, look, I told you guys this is terrible. As far as the BRICS is concerned, sir, I personally believe that it's a very nice talking shop. We say many, many nice things, but ultimately each country, and I think if Ping Pong, whatever his name is, doesn't realize this, he's an idiot, that ultimately each country looks for its own interest. And bilateral relationships are far more important than these multilateral groupings. Of course, we have mini-laterals that are now coming up. You know, we have India, France, Australia, we have India, Indonesia and Japan or something, and India, Australia, Japan, etc. So we have all these coming up, and China is extremely worried. Who does it have to blame? Only itself. This kind of aggressiveness, people talk of assertiveness, that is not true. China is naked aggression, hoping to terrify its neighbors with its size and its population. That is no longer working. Sir, I have traveled extensively. I've just returned from somewhere. I couldn't find one chap who said we love the Chinese. Don't these guys realize this? Because he had told his diplomats, go around abusing everybody, that racket called wolf warrior diplomacy. When that didn't work, he said, oh guys, now let's try a new track, roll over on your backs and have your bellies scratched by everybody. So now you suddenly become a very lovable kind of diplomat. No, it's not happening, sir. We know this. We realize this. As far as India is concerned, who needs India more? Does India need Russia more? Does Russia need India more? I believe it's equal. Russia cannot betray a time-tested relationship with India. It knows what China did to the Soviet Union in, was it 1969 when they attacked the USSR? They know that they cannot rely on China. They'll do it for the time being when China is under pressure. But if China is no longer under pressure, they'll turn around and ask the Russians, Moscow, where is that? Somewhere near Brazil. Nobody trusts them, sir.
All right.
Take my word for it. So I understand them backwards.
Well, so Justin, it seems like on the India-Russia balance scales, it's pretty much even. Whereas, you know, where does India stand in terms of the Quad and BRICS? That is something that it seems like is playing down at India's hands. But we'll have to wait and watch where this war is going, if this stalemate does, you know, continue to go on, and how does that impact not just the war, but breathing space and time for China to think about the Taiwan front, the South China Sea, and of course, its contentious borders with India. Ambassador Deepak Vora, always a pleasure speaking to you. Many thanks for joining with us on the broadcast. Justin, I'm going to again implore everybody here to go and watch the second episode of What's Going On Inside the Mind of Xi. It's on our News 9 Plus application, the second episode, Dictating Terms, the snippet on your screens right now.
The world should not be fooled by any tactical move by Russia, supported by China or any other country, to freeze the war on its own terms.
因为我们是互为最大的邻国，也是战略合作伙伴国。
Во всем мире это вызывает неподдельный интерес, и мы даже немножко вам завидуем.
Very disturbing meeting of minds of Putin and Xi, and clearly a sense that they have common adversary or a set of common adversaries.
China treats trade as an arm of politics, and it can easily decide to weaponize trade against you.
What does China expect? Weaken Russia, weaken the West, and let everybody come to me, and then I'll say, yes, I'm back to being the Middle Kingdom, the master of the universe.
Nearly 70 years ago, Mao Zedong said in Moscow that there are two winds in the world, the east wind and the west wind. And the east wind is prevailing over the west wind. Now, 70 years later, Xi Jinping, the man who is aiming to be the next Mao, is walking in the same steps, cozying up to Vladimir Putin to change the heavily skewed world order.
China is in bed with Russia. China spreads Russian lies every night on TV to their own domestic audience, and every Chinese diplomatic representation spreads the Russian lies, in particular in countries along the global south. So China is pretending to be neutral, but is not. China, it might make Russia more dependent on China. All benefits to a power with hegemonic ambitions.
Whether or not China's going to become, effectively an arms supplier to that conflict, which is now reported as a possibility, even through China's diplomatic and I don't like to use the word moral, but immoral support of Russia's behaviour.
So he wants to tell his domestic audience that, look, the whole world respects me. 8 billion people are begging me to be the president of the universe, but I've not accepted because I want to help you guys. This was aimed at his domestic audience. Certainly, internationally, optically, it gives him and the world the impression that Russia and China are very thick friends.
There's a ruthlessness about the Beijing regime that we have to be realistic about. There is something about the communist regime in Beijing which right now is quite menacing to the wider world.